So it's late at night and I've got a real hankering for some sweet and spicy Korean street food. But unfortunately, there's nowhere nearby that serves it. And a last-minute flight to Korea is not an option. But luckily for me, I have a solution. Tteokbokki. A delightfully sweet and savoury spicy sauce with these rice cakes that are addictively chewy. It's made from just a handful of easy to find ingredients from your local Asian grocer and surprisingly little time and effort. So let's get adventurous. Let's start with the rice cakes. Sometimes you'll find these fresh at an Asian grocer, but I usually find them in the freezer section. They come in various shapes, but I prefer these short little logs. So before cooking, we're going to want to at least partially thaw these out. And the quickest way to do that is simply to unwrap them, place them in a bowl, and pour over some water. And right now this is a bit stiff to fully submerge, so I'll just gently push it down a bit. It's starting to soften in the water and get a little bit of flex to it. Whoops, there it goes. I'll push that just under the water and then put it aside to thaw. The next ingredient I want to talk about is powdered dashi. This is essentially a dehydrated Japanese stock made from kombu seaweed and bonito flakes. It's got a really deep savory flavor, but it's totally optional. If you don't have this, any other powdered stock like vegetable stock or chicken stock will do just fine, or you can just use plain water. Using stock will just give it a little bit of an extra background flavor. So I'm using dashi powder today, and I'm just adding enough hot water to make that up to 3 cups of stock. Now the next ingredient is definitely not optional. This is gochujang, an absolutely wonderful Korean ingredient. It's made from Korean chili powder, glutinous rice, fermented soybeans, and barley malt powder. It's sweet, it's spicy, it's really savory, and is absolutely the heart and flavor base of this dish. So I'm taking 2 generous tablespoons of that and adding it to a bowl. You don't have to mix all these ingredients in a bowl first, you can just throw them straight into the pan. I just like to mix them all together first, and it gives me a chance to talk to you about what each of the ingredients is and what they do to the dish. Next up is gochugaru, Korean red chili flakes. These are hot but not too spicy, have a lovely earthy flavor, and a bright, vibrant red color. It often comes in 2 varieties. One is quite coarse, the other is ground quite fine. For this dish, if possible, go for the fine one. The coarse one will work just fine too. Your sauce will just be a little bit less smooth and have a bit more texture to it. You can adjust the quantity of this depending on how spicy you like it, but for me, for a heat that's prominent but manageable, 1 tablespoon is just right. Next, to bump up the sweetness just a little bit, we're adding 1 tablespoon of sugar. Following that, to boost the savory flavors, a tablespoon of soy sauce. If you can get Korean soy sauce, all the better, but I'm just using my regular one, and that'll do just fine. Then I'm mixing those all together to combine, and this is a really rich and intensely flavorful paste. Next up, I'm going to prepare some vegetables. These are totally optional and totally customizable. Use whatever you like. Personally, I like to have a little bit of green onion cooked in the dish and a little bit sprinkled on top for garnish. So I'm separating the white and the green section of this spring onion and slicing each finely. Other veggies are optional too. I've got a little bit of cabbage that needs to be used up, so I think that'll add some really nice additional texture and a little bit of nutrition. So I'm just finely chopping that with a knife. So aside from my rice cakes, these are all my prepped ingredients ready to go. I've got my stock, my spring onions, my shredded cabbage, and that super pungent gochugaru flavor base. In addition to that, I've got some sesame oil that I'm going to add towards the end for a little bit of extra flavor, and some sesame seeds that I'm going to toast up and use as a garnish. Both also totally optional, but I think they help to take an already delicious dish to the next level. I've put a handful of those sesame seeds in a saucepan over a medium heat, and I'm frequently tossing those around until they start to get brown. If ever you're using sesame seeds in pretty much any dish, I highly recommend toasting them like this. It pretty much quadruples their flavor and takes them from being quite bland to being really toasty and nutty. It's an absolute must. So just toss them periodically. After a few minutes, you'll start to see a few starting to brown like this. Keep tossing them frequently to make sure they don't burn, and when they're nice and golden, remove them from the heat. And now to bring everything together in the final dish. I'm pouring most of the stock into a medium-sized fry pan. I'm holding back a little bit just so that I can adjust the texture of the sauce later if I need to, if it's a bit thick or a bit thin. That's going over a medium heat to warm up, and while it's heating, I'm adding the flavor paste and mixing it in. Once that's beginning to simmer, I'm adding the cabbage and the white parts of the spring onion, followed by the rice cakes. And as far as the cooking's concerned, that's pretty much all the hard work done. It just needs to sit and simmer, being stirred occasionally for about 15 minutes. It'll start out looking a little bit watery, but that's fine. As it cooks, the liquid will reduce a little bit, but also the rice cakes will release some starch into the liquid, and you'll notice it slowly get thicker and thicker until you're left with a rich and luscious sauce. And this is looking about right. You can see as I move the spatula around, you can see little glimpses of the bottom of the pan before the sauce flows back over. That's a pretty good sign that it's ready to go, and it will get a little bit thicker as it cools. Finally, I'm sprinkling in just a little bit of toasted sesame oil. Again, this is optional, but I really like the nice toasty sesame flavor that it adds. And I'm just giving that a quick stir through. Now, there's many ways that you could plate this up to serve it, but personally, I think the simplest and probably best way is not to plate it up at all. I like to enjoy this as it is, straight from the pan. The hot pan also helps to keep it warmer for longer. Now we'll add some final garnish by scattering over the green part of the spring onion and a generous amount of those toasted sesame seeds. And doesn't that look good? Bright red, glossy sauce covering these soft but chewy rice cakes. This is some seriously good tteokbokki. It's the perfect balance of sweet and savory, really spicy but not so much that it'll knock your socks off. The sauce is thick, rich and glossy and really coats each rice cake beautifully, and the rice cakes themselves are soft on the outside and have a really satisfying chew to them. They're so good. This is so delicious for the tiny amount of effort that goes into it. I can totally see why this is such a popular street food. I could eat this for days. For another recipe that punches way above its weight for having big satisfying flavor with minimal time and effort, check out this lemon pasta. It absolutely slaps. And until next time, happy snacking.